Thank you so much for joining us here today. Our next guest is somebody who I'm sure many of you know, Jimmy Pitaro, the chairman of ESPN and sports content at Disney. Jimmy, welcome. Jimmy, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to meet us here at Axios BFD. We heard a little bit about it this morning, but you announced a deal this morning, obviously selling a majority stake in the X Games. Walk us through why you're doing that. Why was now the right time?
First off, we take a ton of pride in the X Games. It's 27-ish years that we have been in that business, the action sports business. It's an important property for us. We talk a lot at ESPN about audience expansion. It's a challenge for everyone in the sports industry. How do we attract younger fans? And X Games was definitely a huge component of that. But when we looked out and we looked at where we were making our investments and how we were prioritizing, we were a bit concerned about how much time we could continue to dedicate. You know, we all have to make tough decisions every single day in our businesses. How much time could we continue to dedicate to X Games and action sports? And then we sat down with some folks, started to have some conversations, and the folks at MSP kind of blew all of us away at ESPN in terms of their vision and how they could kind of take this to the next stage for us. And we kind of regrouped on our side and said, you know what, this was compelling, their vision on X Games, and we want to stay involved. We, of course, want these games to be broadcast on ESPN. We want to maintain an interest in this enterprise. But we trust these guys. They have a great track record. And we're going to go with them. So, yes, we closed the deal and announced it this morning. And we'll see how it plays out. But we're excited about it.
But that need to reach younger audiences, that's not going away. So what's the next big investment that you're making? Yeah. What's your next big X Games to bring them in? Well,
look, I'm going to state the obvious. It's social, how we're showing up on social. I think we're doing a really nice job today. If you look at what we're doing on, for example, Instagram, on Snap, on TikTok, we're the #1 sports brand, of course, across all those properties. And it's going really well. If you look at the data, if you look at our research, what it shows us is that we bring them in, we grow awareness, we grow affinity through social platforms, and then they actually end up spending more time on our owned and operated properties. Like, for me, that's when the angels start singing. You know, it's exactly the strategy. We want to get them excited about ESPN. We can't expect that everyone, especially younger people, are going to come to our owned and operated properties, so we need to go where they are, which is many of these social platforms, and we're showing up well. When you look at what we're doing on these platforms, it's a combination of two things, right? We're looking across the internet, trying to find content that is consistent with our brand, that has the heart, that has the humor, that really represents the ESPN brand so well. And then we're pulling it into our handles. Then we're also creating natively, we're creating content for these platforms. We're creating shows. For example, we have SportsCenter on Snap today, which is going very well.
Okay, so the challenge, though, would be that you have brands like Barstool, who are really tapped into the zeitgeist. ESPN is a little bit of an older brand, obviously. So how are you competing with those sort of younger, emerging brands, the Overtimes, the Barstools, while still staying true to the ESPN ethos?
Well, for example, we're hiring a guy named Omar Raja, who we hired a few years ago, who's fantastic. By the way, he's not just behind the scenes. He's actually talent. He shows up on social platforms. He actually shows up on our air, on linear television. He's doing a fantastic job. He resonates. By the way, if you look at our research, he resonates not just with younger people, but he resonates with people like me. He resonates with my dad loves him. So we're looking at bringing in, identifying talent, bringing them in talent, again, that we think are consistent with our brand, not mean-spirited. It's very easy to bring people in that are looking to generate clicks and they're not kind of connected to our brand. But again, I mentioned before, heart, humor, not mean-spirited content that we think represents us well. That's really the priority here.
Because we're at the BFD conference, we're focused on deals. Wanted to talk to you about a few other deals that have been in the news lately. Bloomberg reported that ESPN and DraftKings are close to brokering a large deal in terms of sports betting. Is that true?
Well, I can't comment on any media speculation. What I will say is that if we did absolutely nothing in this space, it would be good for business, right? The more people that are placing bets, the more invested they are in games, the more likely they are to watch games, and that's great for ratings, and that's great for ad sales, and that's great for our digital presence. That said, we are, of course, we are doing a lot in this space. We've been active in this space for many, many years, and it's going well for us. So if you look across our various platforms, if you look across digital, if you look across direct-to-consumer, linear television, we have shows that we've actually launched over the past couple of years dedicated to sports betting. We take a lot of pride in our alternative broadcasts. For example, we did an NBA alternative broadcast that was specifically focused on sports betting. We have podcasts. We're hiring new talent. We've just been massively invested in this space. We have link-out deals with DraftKings and Caesars. Now it's what's next.
So, but in terms of what's next, you all have said that you're never going to actually be a sports book.
That's
You'll
correct.
never facilitate bets. Why?
We just don't feel like it's appropriate for us to be creating a book. We're not interested in actually being the place where people place their bets. The technology, many of you in this room probably know the technology is incredibly complicated. A lot of folks, a lot of enterprises out there actually were already invested in this space, and they went out and they made acquisitions on the tech side. And so if we were to try to do this, it could take years before we were really, ready to be up and running. So, but it's more about how we see our brand, and we believe that partnership, it would be the right approach for us. Again, we already have partnerships with Caesars and DraftKings. Then the question is, okay, what's next for us? And that can take a variety of forms. We know that our brand has a ton of credibility, a ton of trust. We're contemplating whether we should leverage our brand in that capacity. We have links already. I mentioned the link-out deals. We have links around our sites. Can those links be more prevalent, more seamless?
And that's what you mean by leveraging your brand in that capacity?
Yeah, well, when I talk about our brand, I'm really talking about the trust and the credibility that would convey to a sports fan or a fan that's looking to place a bet. When I talk about the link integration and essentially the promotion, we can be doing more of that. We have some of it across our sites, across our apps. Can we be doing more of that? Can it be more seamless? Can we be doing a better job at promoting this type of offering across studio programming, across live games? We're starting to think about that.
So essentially going back to leveraging the brand, would that be like you licensing to a third party access to the ESPN brand so that when someone's issuing a bet, let's say on DraftKings or FanDuel, there's a trust there because the ESPN name is there?
Look, everything's been on the table. We've been contemplating a variety of scenarios in terms of that next step for us in that space. But I will say that we have a lot of faith in our brand and our research. We've done a ton of research in this department, and what we've seen is that our fans are not just okay with us doing more, they're actually expecting it. And so we believe that it's going to be a brand deposit, not a withdrawal, if we were to be more aggressive here.
This is an interesting time for ESPN. The last time Jimmy and I saw each other was several years ago when you were launching ESPN+. But coming out of the pandemic, there's a ton of momentum. Live sports are doing well. And yet there was still an activist investor, Dan Loeb, who pressured Disney a few months ago to spin out ESPN. Ultimately, the two parties came to an agreement. But I would love your take on that activist investor push. What do you think was really motivating him? Was he trying to just drive down the price so someone else could buy it? What was the intention there?
I don't know. I haven't met him. I haven't spoken to him. But I will tell you that Bob Chapek has been clear and consistent that ESPN is an important part of the Walt Disney Company, an important part of the future of the Walt Disney Company. It's connected to our strategy. Folks at Disney, folks on our board, they see the value of live sports. I think last year, 95 of the top 100 broadcasts were sports. Folks at Disney see the value in the ESPN brand. They see our strategy. You know, we do a 5-year plan. We talk about our 10-year strategy. There's a lot of confidence and a lot of faith in terms of what we're doing over here, and it's going really well. I mean, it's so fashionable right now to talk about all of the challenges in the sports industry. Talked about younger people, cord cutting, and yet in the middle, all the new competition. You know, Amazon and Apple, you know, now entering the space. What's Netflix going to do? It's, again, very fashionable to talk about all the headwinds that we have, the other incumbents in the industry have. And yet, in the middle of all this, we actually, in 22, have broken records. When I say broken records, that's across linear, that's across digital, that's across social platforms. And so we take a lot of pride in that. And I think, well, I know that the folks that are in Burbank, the folks at the Walt Disney Company, they see what's happening over here, and they see the success that we're having across these various platforms, and the fact that we are not just a linear network. We take a ton of pride in our linear networks, but ESPN is far beyond just one or several traditional linear networks. We are a multi-platform sports ecosystem.
But is the revenue from your other bets outside of linear growing fast enough to one day supplant linear when linear dies, which is, it could be within the next few years?
Look, it's a great question. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how that will play out. What I will tell you is that as I sit here right now, the plan is parallel paths. So we still very much value this traditional ecosystem. What I mean by that is linear television. When we acquire rights, we are acquiring rights not just for digital, that gets all the attention in the media, but we acquire rights to this day for our traditional platforms. So it just continues to be a priority, the linear business. But again, in parallel is direct-to-consumer. So we launched ESPN Plus in April of 2018, so it's been over 4 years now. We take a ton of pride in where that platform is. It's going far better than we forecasted. As I sit here, I think we announced close to 23 million subscribers at our last earnings call. That was the last number that we gave publicly. I think it was around 22.8. But the idea is to continue to make investments in both linear and direct-to-consumer. And you know, our mission is serve the sports fan anytime, anywhere. If you want to access ESPN through DirecTV or Comcast, we're going to be there, and you're going to be able to. Today, we have ESPN Plus. There might come a point in time where ESPN Flagship is available a la carte. We're not there yet. As I sit here right now, we are not, I will say without any reservation, we are not there yet. We are very happy with what we're doing on ESPN Plus. But yes, we will continue to run these parallel paths.
So when you're thinking about the rights for linear, for example, there are a few tentpoles that are coming up. Obviously, there's been some headlines about the Pac-12 negotiations. Where are you on that? Do you think you're going to retain those rights?
So look, we're coming out of the pandemic. We're looking at a string of rights acquisitions that is probably our most impactful string in our 43-year history. NFL, NHL, SEC, La Liga, Wimbledon. I mean, I can go on and on here. So our rights acquisitions team was really busy during the pandemic. We got a ton accomplished over Zoom. But to your point, there's a lot coming. There's Pac-12, there's Big 12, there's college football playoff expansion, which has been reported on publicly. There's, of course, NBA. Now, we have several years left with the NBA. We have several years left on the college football playoff, but we're starting to have those conversations right now. One thing I will say, Sara, is we can't have everything. And so we saw that play out with the Big Ten. They came to us and they were offering fewer games at a higher price. And ultimately, as Bob Chapek has said consistently, every deal that we do has to make sense for our investors, has to be accretive. And we have a pretty sophisticated rights acquisitions team. We model out every deal. There's no guesswork here. And so we just unfortunately could not make sense we love the folks at the Big Ten. We just couldn't make sense of it. We couldn't make it work. And like I said before, we sleep at night knowing that we can't have everything. It just does not make financial sense for our business. But I will also tell you that on sticking with college, if you fast forward to 2024, when our new SEC deal kicks in, we will have 64% of the college football market, which is essentially where we are today. So walking away from the Big Ten does not mean long-term our college football inventory will diminish. It's not the case.
I think college is where we're at right now because Pac-12 expires next year, but you mentioned NBA, and that's coming up in 3 years. Where do you think those lights are going to land, and do you think that they are going to follow the lead of the NFL and start to put more on streaming with tech companies?
Look, I can only tell you what I've read, which is that Amazon is interested in the NBA. No one has told me that. I've seen it reported publicly. I will tell you that I think Amazon has done a nice job with the NFL. I will also tell you that I actually think that that's good for us at ESPN and the Walt Disney Company. So why do I say that? First off, if you look at their average audience, it's about 8 years younger at Amazon than it is for everyone else at the NFL. And so that's good. They're bringing new people, younger people into this football ecosystem. That's going to help Monday Night Football, in my opinion. They're helping to grow the game of football. Number two, they are obviously a direct-to-consumer digital platform. Well, for early adopters of direct-to-consumer, again, we've been in this space for 4+ years in terms of multi-sport, direct-to-consumer investments. Ultimately, if the customer gets more familiar with consuming NFL games through a direct-to-consumer platform, I have to assume that that's going to benefit folks like ESPN who are massively invested in direct-to-consumer. So that's Amazon and how I think this all impacts ESPN. On the other side of it, yes, this is not getting any easier for any of us in the industry. It's not just Amazon. We saw what Apple did with Major League Soccer. There are rumors that Apple is going to be even more aggressive, including on the NFL side. I don't know if that's the case or not, but again, you all have seen that and heard it. It's a tough environment for us right now, and it's not just the new media, the larger tech companies. It's some of the smaller tech companies as well that are coming in and bidding for rights. So I would say it's tougher today than it's ever been. But all that said, I really do like our hand. Like if you look at the power of the Walt Disney Company, what we bring to the table in terms of our brand, our reach, our scale, the quality of our production, the synergy at the Walt Disney Company, the fact that we bring cable with ESPN channels, we bring ABC broadcast, we bring Hulu, we bring the megaphone that is ESPN, all of our sports center promotion, all of our studio promotion. If I'm a league commissioner and if it's a jump ball and I'm choosing between ESPN and the Walt Disney Company and someone else, it's not even a question. I am going with ESPN because of all the things I just mentioned.
Talking about where ESPN fits within the larger portfolio, do you find that you're having more conversations in deals where you're referencing ABC, putting more games on ABC? Are you looping them in more to be competitive than you were?
I do. It's another great question. So let's talk women's sports for a second. So we take a ton of pride in the growth of women's sports. And one of the things that we've been doing over the past several years is moving a lot of our games from ESPN or ESPN2 to ABC. And what you're seeing is numbers are up and to the right on women's sports. So this idea of if you build it, they will come, we're actually, actually seeing it play out. Where as we move games and we forecast numbers, they're playing out. So we feel really good about that. But yes, to your question, in general, we are doing more and more on ABC. We're doing more and more on Hulu. As the majority owner of Hulu, it makes sense for us. And by the way, the NHL deal that we did a couple of years ago is one of the deals that I mentioned. We really got that deal done without any hesitation, I will say, and if Gary Bettman were sitting here right now, he would echo this. We got that deal done because of all the various platforms that we brought to the table. ABC for the NHL final, Hulu has regular season games. ESPN Plus has exclusive regular season games, and of course, our linear network. So it's one of the advantages that we have over our competition is just this plethora of platforms that we can bring from the Walt Disney Company as we enter these negotiations.
You mentioned women's sports. ESPN has a large 11-year deal package that includes women's sports, but there's been some criticism, not of necessarily at ESPN, but that broadcast rights don't necessarily represent the true value of women's sports. Would love your thoughts on that, and would love your thoughts on which women's sports you see have huge potential in terms of deal making.
Look, I definitely think that's accurate, what you just said, and by the way, that's on us, like at ESPN. Like we know that we have to continue to make women's sports a priority. If we're gonna lead in the sports space, a big part of that is leading as it pertains to women's sports. And so, by the way, today is the Sports Business Journal Game Changers event where they're celebrating women in sports, which I think is fantastic. And by the way, my sister is the general counsel for Major League Baseball. And so I love the fact that the industry in general is more focused than ever on, not just women's sports, but women in sport. I think it's fantastic. And by the way, we take a ton of pride on that at ESPN as well.
When we think about deals, right now we've been talking about a lot of transactions, but there's also the deals that ESPN has to make with its talent. You're starting to see, Stephen A. Smith, for example, has a podcast deal with Odyssey, but then obviously has shows with you. How are you thinking about talent in this creator economy where they want to be multi-platform, but obviously you have an incentive to keep them on as many of your channels as possible?
So look, first off, as it pertains to talent, like who are the needle movers? Who are people tuning in for? Stephen A. is a fantastic example of that. Number two, who are our up-and-coming stars like Malika Andrews or Marcus Spears, Dan Orlovsky? I mentioned Omar Raja, Pat McAfee. Like, let's get out there and let's identify folks that are currently on our bench or even folks on the outside like Omar. Those are, I think, the two components. But so what do we bring to the table here? You mentioned like multi-platform. Stephen A. is again the best example where he's doing First Take. He came to me and said, I would like to do this podcast. Long story short, we said, go do it. We're going to embrace the spirit of you doing other things. But also what I said to him is there's a lot of other stuff we can be doing here at the Walt Disney Company at ESPN. So, connecting Stephen with my colleagues at Disney, my colleagues at Hulu, my colleagues at ABC, saying to Stephen, hey, maybe we should be doing an alternative broadcast. So we've had some success with the Manning brothers in connection with Monday Night Football. Maybe Stephen A. should be doing that, something similar for our NBA broadcasts. And so fast forward to today, this moment in time, and tonight we have an NBA doubleheader, and Stephen A. will have his first alternative broadcast, which we're pretty excited about. But in terms of how we retain talent, it's actually not dissimilar to what I mentioned before about deals. And in my conversations with commissioners, we're able to say to our top talent like Mike Greenberg and Scott Van Pelt, hey, we don't just think linear. We have ESPN Plus, and we have Hulu, and we have ABC. We have an assortment of assets, at your fingertips. You just got to let us know. And then the last thing I'd say, I'm kind of rambling here, but the last thing I'd say is come to us with ideas. We say to talent, the beauty of ESPN Plus is it's infinite real estate. With linear broadcast, there's only so many hours in the day. You look at ESPN Plus and our ESPN app, and we can program as much as we want as long as it makes financial sense for us. So one of the things that I've said to our talent is, don't be shy if you have ideas, especially ideas that can help us attract and speak to a younger generation, bring them to me. And that's happening right now, and I think our talent love that.
So at Axios, we like to finish all of our newsletters typically with one fun thing. And so you mentioned the one fun thing I wanted to bring up, which was, of course, the Manning cast. It's had such explosive success, and it's inspired so many other multicasts around. But do you think that they are an anomaly? Are others going to be able to replicate, including Stephen A. Smith, the same type of ratings and zeitgeist and cultural phenomenon that the Manning brothers have? Because they've up until this point, they've been truly the outliers.
Yeah, definitely lightning in a bottle. Like, they are incredible. The chemistry between two brothers. I don't think anyone would have predicted the way the two of them are resonating. My teenagers are the best example, Sara, where I'll be the first to admit it's tough to get, you know, my kids to watch 4 quarters or 9 innings, but my kids are fully invested and all in on the Mannings. It's authentic. You know, we took a little bit of criticism or a little bit of heat early on when they were talking over each other. I mean, it was coming out of COVID and we were doing it virtually and they were in different locations and it wasn't syncing perfectly. My kids love that. They felt like, oh my, the lack of polish out of the gate was actually a net positive for them, if you could believe it. But yes, they resonate, again, just bringing this full circle. The Mannings resonate with my dad, me, and my kids, so we're doing something right there. But yes, we are trying to replicate this, this success. Hopefully Stephen A can do that. And then the last thing I'd say, just somewhat connected to this spirit of innovation, is it's all about access right now. If you look at what younger people want, if you look at, like, we're putting mics, all through Sunday Night Baseball this season, we put live mics on players in the field. Okay, we've always, NFL films, we've always had mics on players, but we did it live, where we had players in the field speaking real time with they're actually getting regular season games that matter, getting balls hit to them, and they're communicating with our folks. And again, in terms of what my kids, what the younger generation wants, they want access to players, and so we're trying to deliver that.
And quickly, before we lose you, is there a particular sport, I know you've expanded the Manning cast deal a little bit, that you're more excited about, in addition to football and basketball, for these sort of multicasts that we should look out for? Well,
we actually had Michael Kay and Alex Rodriguez, we called it K-Rod for Major League Baseball. We've done the UFC. I don't know, we did some golf. I don't know if there's another sport that we're super excited about, because we've kind of nailed it. If I had to pick one, it would probably be partnering with Gary Bettman and the NHL, because we have such a huge partnership with them that we just closed a couple of years ago. We got 6 years left on this deal. We're trying to grow the game of hockey, make the game of hockey younger, more diverse. There's an opportunity there.
Amazing. Jimmy Pitaro, chairman of ESPN and sports content, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you. Appreciate it.